very excited to be back on the UXDX stage. My name is Alkis Ismaveridi. I'm a director of product design at Kayak. I've been at Kayak for 7 years and a day, actually. Yesterday was my work anniversary. And today I'm going to talk to you about what I think is one of the most difficult parts of the product development process, which is connecting the dots in problem definition. But before, let me tell you a little bit about our wonderful product and our wonderful team. So Kayak started in 2004 with a group of technologists and travelers who wanted to solve one of the most complicated things about traveling, which is how to search and compare flights. So if you think about it, before Kayak existed, if you wanted to find a flight, you just had to check every airline or every OTA, online travel agent, like our friends from Priceline. You have to go through all of them to find the one that actually works for you. And they wanted to solve that for themselves and for the people who use our product. So 20 years later, we are a global brand on more than 60 markets and 7 travel brands. So the travel industry, I would say, is one of the most complex industries out there. There's so many diverse stakeholders. There's so many changing parameters from environmental, regulatory, economical, and of course, there's the increasing high standards that our users have for personalized and for seamless experiences that we need to offer. But despite that, despite being in a complex environment and a company that's been a mature product and team for 20 years, we're still very passionate about innovation. And we're a team that's lean and fast. And this is just a shameless plug of some of our awesome features. Check out our most recent product release that we did earlier this year, and how we're using AI to help people solve some of these problems. So if you test those out, please find us. We have a booth right outside. Talk to us. We would love to hear what you think. I'm not here today to talk about these things. I'm here today to talk to you about what I think is one of the most critical parts of product development. So the question that I'm saying here is, how do we, as a company of 20 years and a mature product, still retain speed and flexibility? And the answer, and part of the answer to that question, is that we're always relooking at our processes. And we're always trying to see the parts of our processes that slows us down and cause a lot of disruption, and trying to optimize on those. So looking at what's happening right now in our teams develop product is very important for us to ensure that we retain speed. So this is our product development process. This would be familiar to all of you, and you should also notice that it's portrayed as a linear product development process, but it's actually never linear. There's always back and forth, and there's always disruptions and things that happen along the way that makes us either have to pivot or restart some of the parts of the development process. So where have we identified that most of these issues come from is the problem definition. So the problem definition usually ends up ensuring or creating some of the reasons why the project might succeed or might fail. And one of the things that we'll have to note here is that it's critical not just for the development of the project, but also for the success of the team. Because the more disruptions you have along the way, the more likely you are to cause time to be wasted, teams to be whiplashed, and also burnouts through the team. So always you have to make sure you put appropriate time on your problem definition. So how might you know that maybe you or your team or your organization is struggling with some parts of the product definition? Here are some signals to look out for. One, you might be spending excessive time in discovery mode, sifting through a lot of insights and data, trying to make sure that you have your problem definition defined. 2, you might be struggling to distill your projects into a concise and compelling narrative, making it very challenging to communicate your project's goal effectively. And third one, you might have difficulty prioritizing your list of opportunities out of a big list of identified issues that you want to fix. So if you were facing any of these signals, the good news is that you're probably not alone. A lot of teams actually struggle with this. So today, we are going to share with you some of the learnings that we had out of trying to resolve this under the theme of connecting the dots. We're going to have 3 areas of focus. Our research, our data, and our communications. All right, so let me start with one of our first cases for Kayak. So in Kayak, our product design team does a lot of our UX research. And we love talking to our users. We love getting as many insights as we can from those sessions. But in the past years or so, we found ourselves in this situation where we're being presented a very thorough deck with a lot of data. And at the end of it, we're kind of left with the question of, OK, what does this actually mean? What is the main learning? And what does it actually mean for the project that we're currently working on? And it's unclear what the answer to that is. So what might be some reasons why this is happening? Here's some things to ask yourself. Do you have a scope of your research that's way too wide? Some of the reasons why this could happen is that you're just excited to talk to users and you want to get as much out of it as you can from each session. Or you might have stakeholders who are curious about something and they want to throw in a few questions just because it doesn't hurt. But the problem is that then you're getting into difficulty in actually getting the answer to the problem that you set out to answer. Another issue that might come up is that you might be focusing on gathering data rather than insights and patterns. So we're going to talk about some learnings that we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. All right. So learning number 1. This is about making sure that you're disciplined when you're running research. Always write down your goals and hypotheses. And while that seems basic, we often actually skip that step and we go into the research plan, what questions we're going to ask and what we're trying to get the script, making sure all the technical parts are fixed. But the goals and hypotheses are a huge indicator of whether your research plan is actually set up correctly. So if you have more than 2 goals or maximum of 5 hypotheses, you should consider breaking down your research into different sessions. That is because your goals might actually be contradicting in terms of what you're actually trying to learn. Is it a usability question, or is it a behavioral question or a market research? Which means that you can't select the right methodology, or you might have to choose different number of participants. So it's very important to write down what you're actually trying to get out of this test to ensure that you're running it the best way. This is also important. When it comes to qualitative research, you should try to reduce the number of participants to make sure that you get to the point where you're getting insights and not necessarily data. So your research is valuable even without big numbers, because what you're getting out of it is not a statistical significance, it's insights that if you then need to go and validate in different ways, you can do that with different methodologies. You can do that with surveys, you can do that with testing, you can do that with data. But your insights can still come out of a small number of participants. So one of the tools that we use to ensure that we're running the right amount of users per session is the Pareto principle, which some of you might know as the 80-20 rule. So that says that 20% of your efforts actually have 80% of the impact. So you start going above the curve of the 80% of impact, then you're just using a lot of your time without getting as much impact from your research as possible. This one is a little bit more about the methodology of making sure that you have insights and not data when you're presenting your results. So we call this processing vertically and horizontally, which means that you're processing each of your sessions as one whole thing. You summarize it, which means that you summarize the user's behaviors, characteristics, things that are notable about that specific session. And then you go across and compare the answers for all your sessions. That is a great methodology for creating patterns, because, for example, if you have the answer to a question that says 2 out of 5 people said that the site is easy to use, that doesn't really tell you anything. But if then you start going connecting the patterns and say, oh, those two users actually have a common characteristic. Let's say they're very budget conscious. So then you start getting an insight that you can chase and see what actually it actually means. And finally, this is also a thing about discipline in research, is to avoid distractions. Again, we love talking to our users, and every session is so valuable. So it might contain things, tidbits that you want to share with the team, or you want to use, but they're not actually answering the question that you set up to answer. It's important to remove those distractions from your test. And ideally, you have a system for saving them, so you can go back to them when you're investigating that specific subject. So that system could be tags, could be a repository of insights, could be something that you can go and look back to. But don't fill up the rest of your deck just picking up all those little insights that I agree are very, very valuable and enchanting to go through. But you have to focus on the thing that you set up to do, which is your specific research question. So if I want you to take one thing about this, is that it's very important to practice discipline when you're running your research projects. All right, let's move on to Kayak case number 2. So at Kayak, we love numbers. We love to ensure that we have an A/B testing culture, so we like to ensure that we A/B test most or all of our projects. We have internal and external tools that we use to track our metrics. So it's a conversation that we always have. And this is an example of a conversation about a new metric, which is how do we measure the quality of our UX. So we started discussing different ways of doing that. One of them was the number of bugs, of UX bugs that were reported. So we can track that, but that doesn't actually tell us if they've been resolved. So then we add onto it, okay, what if we track the number of bugs that were resolved, which is great, but also creates a dependency in another team, and it still doesn't show us where we're at if we've made the site so great that we don't have a lot of UX bugs to resolve. So then we talked about what if we do heuristic audits that actually shows us the state of the site, and that way we can benchmark it the next time. And there were other ideas as well. And the point I'm trying to make is that there isn't really this one perfect metric that you can chase and can always tell you the full story. So what I would love for you to ask yourself when you're looking at data and trying to connect the dots is, are you trying to find the one perfect metric to tell you if your goal is achieved? And are you torturing data to tell you a story? So that's a famous quote by Ronald Coase that says that if you torture data long enough, it will tell you any story that you want. So you have to make sure that you don't start from what you're trying to prove and kind of switch through data. Does that tell that story? Does that tell that story? And that has happened. We've seen it happen where we're like pulling the data to try to prove the hypothesis that we have. But you have to have multiple indicators to tell you where you're going. All right, so some learnings for us. Continuously ask yourself what you're trying to solve for and focus on that first. And try to figure out what the gap is. So the problem you're trying to solve means that you're trying to get from one place to another. So that is the gap that you're trying to measure. And that gap, already, just by defining it like that, you can think of it as indicators that show you that you're in one place versus the other. So those are the indicators that you should look for and start measuring in order to see where you're going. And the second one is what I already mentioned, is like those are your indicators and it's not your goal, your end goal. So one other story that I can say here in terms of where you are and where you're trying to go is that we had a team at Kayak that was very metrics focused. And there were issues in the UX that we're trying to solve that were coming in qualitatively. But often we got the answer, but like we don't see that. Like we don't see this in the metrics. It doesn't show like we have a problem. However, people could see it, even internally, like unofficially, that feedback was coming in, that there's a lot of friction in that. So that's the problem with having metrics that are your only North Star And following those, they can blind you to what the outcome that you're chasing actually is. So the main learning that I want to leave you with on this is another famous quote, Goodhart's law. When a metric becomes a goal, it stops being a good metric. And that doesn't mean that we don't love metrics. We love them, but they're not the goal. They're the indicators that help you get where you want to go. All right, let's go to kayak case number 3. And the final example is about communication, which I think is very, very critical. And I would love to know how many of you have been in this case where you shared your very, very thorough decks and the solutions and briefs. No one gave feedback, and then when you start working on something, further down the line, people are like, why are you working on this? Like, you shouldn't be. Like, change this, change that. So is that a familiar struggle with anyone here? That's great. So let's see, when that's happening, and I'll tell you another example before I go into this, go back here. So when another example that we've had happen is we're having our leadership come and ask for one-pagers of long and complex briefs. So when I took upon that task to summarize some of our briefs and some of the problem definitions that we had, I went into it with a mindset that I was catering for the needs of people who didn't have enough time to go through long briefs. So I thought I was catering for the lack of time. But actually, after spending a lot of time into long briefs in projects that I was familiar with, that I knew were a lot more straightforward, I realized that the more details we were adding, the more vulnerable we are to actually introducing contradictions or losing sight of what we're actually trying to achieve. So the one-pager wasn't really just a tool for executive leadership, for example, to go through it fast. It was actually a tool for us to make sure that we haven't lost sight of what the goal is. So questions to ask yourself when it comes to communications. Are you hindering communications? And are you getting lost in the details? So here's a couple of learnings from us when it comes to these kind of indicators. The first one is to cater for your audience upwards, downwards, and laterally. That means, with the example that I said, that upwards you might have to have a summary of the project that you're working on. And that's very helpful to you also to make sure that you keep sight of the big picture. Downwards, it might mean that you get into the details. You ensure you have all the edge cases. And laterally could mean that you're handling all of the dependencies with the other teams and making sure you expose them. As an individual contributor, this is very important for you to do, because then you're enabling people to give you feedback at the right time. So if you have an indication maybe that your manager is spending a lot of time trying to understand what your project is about, that means that you should do the exercise of summarizing it. And as a manager, you should also feel comfortable asking for that. And you're not being difficult by asking for the executive summary. You're just protecting your perspective, because if you go in the weeds, then you have the same perspective as the team that's working on it. You are the one that can be able to connect the dots across that level of strategy or the cross-functional teams that you're working with. So it's important to ask for it if you need it. And the final learning for this part is to keep the big picture in sight when it comes to prioritization. And I'm going to share another story on this, which is a project that we're working on. And I'm going to use a metaphor here because I think it's going to be easy to understand. But let's say we were fixing a house, and we're in the house, and it's a mess. Like, we're trying to clean it up. And there's just so many things going on. And then someone from our leadership team comes in, sees us cleaning through the floor, washing the dishes, and it's like, the roof is falling. Have you noticed that there's no roof? We're like, yeah, but there's all these things that we need to fix. Like, we've done this audit, it's so much friction. And it's like, it doesn't matter, because if you don't fix the roof, then the flood's going to come, it's going to wash out everything. So it doesn't matter. But this is an actual case where we had to convince the team to drop what they were doing and fix a roof, because it just felt very important. You're very close to it. You've seen the user interviews. You see how people struggle with it. You want to fix it. However, having the big picture inside can help you prioritize some of these tasks that need to be fixed first before you move into those details. All right, so what I would love to leave you with on communications is that empowering communication is one of your strongest tools to make sure that your project direction is correct. And also, when you enable feedback, you create quality checks for your product. So feedback will come. So it's to your advantage that you make sure that the feedback comes in timely. All right. So to summarize, connecting the dots is one of the most important things that happen in the problem definition. Problem definition is very, very hard, because when you're working in the weeds, it's really hard to zoom out and see the big picture, and you have to ensure that you're handling the right scope and that you're taking into consideration the right data. So two of the strategies that we're working on is connecting the dots, collection of strategies to make sure that the designers are able to see the big picture while working on their problem definition. And also, especially for mature products, it's a critical lever to make sure you protect your speed, your flexibility, and the quality of your product. We shared some of our learnings from problem definition on research, which is it's very important to practice research with discipline, on data, which is to focus on the outcome and not just the metric, and on communication, which is that empowering communications helps you keep sight of the big picture. So how can you apply this? Always check that your problem is well defined. Scope your research wisely, identify the gap that you're trying to solve for, and find your indicators that help you understand that you're moving forward, and communicate concisely and effectively. So hope that was helpful. Stay in touch, and thank you very much.
Alkesis, that was fantastic.
All right.
You know, maybe I'm a cheap date, but you had me at how might we? You know? I mean, just a great way to frame the presentation.
There always has to be a how might we there.
Yeah, I mean, you know your audience, right? I also really enjoyed like the vertical horizontal that you had laid out there as well.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a very effective strategy, especially when you can actually display it visually. So when you have a tool that you can put your insights and kind of go through them in that manner, it really helps connect what your data is with your patterns that you're seeing. So you're not just presenting 3 out of 5 people said this. You're actually picking up the insights that you need to share.
Yeah, it's a bit of like root cause identification, right? Which I think is somewhat in line with your connect the dots there. You could have taken that metaphor in a lot of different directions.
Right.
So it looks like we have a question that starts with, love the presentation. So, you know, we're off to the races. What would you say are the key components of a one-pager?
So the one-pager, usually the first thing that you have to do is a problem definition. So if you have that part, that's already a lot of work that you have to pull in together. And it should be simple and straightforward, but you have to make sure that you're actually hitting the problem definition. But there's more things that you could add there. Some of it is the context. That helps you give a little bit of the bigger picture of what you're working with. This might be a little controversial, but some people have proposed concept, and this is a very dangerous part to go into solutionized examples, but this is more about what are you actually, like it's identifying the gap, where you are and where you're trying to get. And then that one-pager could also include, it depends on how technical your project is, it could include your insights from a user perspective, it could include your dependencies, the things that you need to check next, and of course, what is your expected impact? So after you have your problem definition and your context that shows where you are and where you want to go, then you need to ensure and talk about why you need to work on this, both from a user perspective and a business perspective.
Love it. Alkistis, I want to take us out of theory and into application here. There's an interesting question, which I think we could all benefit from an answer on, which is how do you deal with conflict when it comes to that problem definition? Like how might we deal with scenarios whereby product has a different point of view than development and or design? Like how do you address that?
I would ask why there is a conflict to begin with, because maybe this could have different methods that you apply to this. For example, if you have a conflict because those teams are working in silos and they're not bringing their insights together to actually create that problem definition, I would start there. Like, why is your organization not collaborating in making sure those insights, those insights come from a combined effort? Then, like for us, because we work very integrated with design and product, I think it becomes just a matter of making sure that the teams, if they're not convinced about it, maybe the problem is not validated enough. So then you need to take your product to problem definition into more validation. So if your one-pager is just not convincing, then you need to relook at it. So I'm coming at it from a perspective of those teams work together to actually develop some of these problem definitions. So I assume that you have experts from your product validating that this is actually a problem definition that makes sense. If there's disagreement there, you go back to it as a team and you resolve where these disagreements come from. So if that process is not happening, again, maybe it's an organizational issue where your siloed stakeholders should come together at an earlier stage.
So you talk it out.
Well, if you can't talk it out, then you need to go and research it. You need to bring the data that actually shows that this is a real problem. It's not, I'm not here standing to just defend a problem that I came out of just my imagination, right? Usually problem definition comes with the data that will say that this is important to solve, or this is actually happening to the users of our product. So if you don't have that, where's the disagreement happening? Is it on the existence of this data, the validation of this data, or is it on whether this data actually means that that's the problem, right? So depends on what stage the conflict is in.
I love it. Unfortunately, we only have like 27 seconds left. And I don't think we have a question on here that's easily answered in 27 seconds. So Alkistis, I just want to thank you again for your presentation and everything that you put together for us and for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.